On a night when the wind howls across an endless plain, the world outside feels carved from ice. Snow races sideways, biting against the skin, and every footprint disappears almost as soon as it is made. It is the kind of night when the stars seem far away, hidden behind clouds, and the earth itself feels like a cave sealed in frost. And yet, somewhere out there, a family lies asleep. They are not buried deep in stone or wood, not protected by brick or iron, but resting inside a tent of poles and hides. The storm presses against the walls. The fire glows faintly at the center, and still they sleep in peace. How was such a thing possible? How did generations endure nights like these, without freezing, without despair, turning fragile shelters into warm homes through winter after winter? That is the story we are about to follow tonight. Welcome to Ancient Fireside. If you find comfort in these quiet journeys into the past, you are invited to like this video, subscribe if you wish to return again, and share a comment with the place and hour where you find yourself listening. Your footprints join many others here, gathered around a fire of memory and wonder. And now, let us step gently into that circle of warmth, where the storm waits outside, and the tent becomes a moving cave. On the wide plains, where winter winds stretch their voices across hundreds of empty miles, a storm could fall so suddenly that even the trees seem to hide. Picture that endless white, a blizzard roaring like a chorus of wolves. The snow did not fall in delicate flakes, but in heavy, sideways sheets, scratching the skin, stealing the breath. Yet somewhere within that world of cold and noise, a circle of warmth lived quietly, hidden inside a tent of buffalo hide. To step inside was to feel as though you had left the storm entirely, as if a cave itself had risen out of the prairie and chosen to travel with its people. The Tipi, as the Lakota and other Plains nations called it, was more than a shelter. It was an answer to the riddle of survival, a structure shaped not by accident, but by centuries of refining knowledge. 12 to 20 long poles of lodgepole pine or cedar leaned together, tied high at their tips. Against this frame, hides of buffalo, sometimes 10, sometimes 20, stitched and stretched, were wrapped like a thick cloak. At the base, the hides reached all the way to the ground. Families would weigh the edges down with snow or with sod to block the knives of the wind. What you had then was not just a tent, but a kind of portable fortress against winter's cruelty. It is tempting to imagine the teepee as fragile cloth flapping in the cold, but in truth, it was closer to a living structure. The poles themselves formed a conical skeleton strong enough to shrug off blizzards. Their angle shed snow before it could gather. Buffalo hide was thick, heavy, oily by nature, and when dried properly, it resisted both moisture and wind. When layered, it became as close to fur walls as a human dwelling could manage. In the firelight, the interior seemed to glow with a soft, animal warmth, as though the spirit of the buffalo still lingered in the skin and lent its strength to the family that slept beneath it. Every family made the inside their own, but certain details were common. The fire sat at the heart, its smoke drawn upward toward the meeting of poles where a hole was left open. Mats or hides lay upon the ground to soften the frozen earth. For sleeping, people stretched buffalo robes thick as mattresses, and children nestled between them. Instead of soft pillows, they might rest their heads on sacks stuffed with prairie grass or cattail fluff. The sound of the storm outside became muffled. The sharp edge of the wind dulled to a distant sigh, and in that muffled space, you could hear smaller sounds. The sigh of a sleeping child, the shuffle of a dog curling closer to the fire, the crack of resin within the wood as flames licked upward. One of the more charming details that visitors often recorded was the role of dogs. They were not only hunters, helpers, or guardians, but in winter, they became a kind of living heater. A dog would lie pressed against a child, or wedge itself into a crook of legs, tail across its nose, radiating steady warmth. In a teepee on the northern plains, a good dog was not just a companion, but what you might call a breathing furnace. People joked that each family measured its warmth by the number of dogs it owned. This little quirk was as much a part of survival as the hides themselves. Historians and anthropologists sometimes debate exactly how effective a teepee could be in temperatures that plunged far below zero. Some accounts insist that with the fire burning, the inside could be warm enough for comfort, even allowing children to sleep with arms outside the robes. Others argue that the warmth was relative, a reprieve rather than a luxury, and that the air near the edges still carried a bite. The truth is likely both. The teepee created a bubble where life was possible, where warmth was just enough to allow laughter and dreams, though not so perfect as to banish all memory of the cold. The very debate itself shows how the line between fact and experience blurs when survival is at stake. When we imagine stepping into such a place, it helps to think not in terms of temperature alone, but of sensation. Outside, the air would sting like needles. Inside, it would soften, smelling of smoke and hide, tinged with the faint scent of earth where snow had been packed at the base. The walls glowed golden with firelight, the poles forming dark ribs overhead. It felt not unlike a cave, though this cave could be raised in a day and packed away in the morning if the herd moved. That is why many elders describe the teepee as our walking cave, with the herd. A place that turned the endless plains into a kind of home ground, no matter how far one traveled. The engineering was practical, but it also carried spirit. The circle shape of the teepee mirrored the circle of the sky, the circle of the sun's path, the circle of life itself. Families sat and slept in a circle around the fire, their stories and songs traveling the same path as sparks rising toward the smoke hole. The poles pointed upward, converging, reminding everyone that though many, they met in one place. For a child drifting to sleep beneath that canopy, it was as if the stars themselves had been invited inside, framed by the opening at the top. Imagine that moment, a child half asleep, the storm still growling beyond. Yet within, the air turns to velvet, the fire snaps, the hides breathe softly as the wind presses against them, and above, through the smoke hole, one or two stars blink, stubborn against the clouds. The family drifts in unison, warmed by robes and dogs and embers, each breath joining the shared rhythm of the teepee. The cave has become alive, portable, a heartbeat in the middle of the frozen plain. And so the teepee was never just fabric on poles. It was memory, animal, fire, and sky woven together. Its strength lay not only in hides and wood, but in the way it gathered lives into a circle, holding them steady through the longest nights. For outsiders, it may have looked simple, but for those who lived within, it was both an everyday home and a marvel of balance. To build a teepee was to build a small world that kept the vast, dangerous one outside at bay. The storm still raged, but within that moving cave, a family slept. Their breath rose to join the smoke, their dreams warmed by fire, their lives bound by the cleverness of their ancestors. Outside, the snow erased footprints within minutes. Inside, the circle endured, a small defiance against the vast winter. And this is where our journey begins. with the tent that walked the plains like a cave on legs, with warmth stitched from buffalo and bound by pine. From
As the
here,
embers fade,
we will step deeper into the mysteries of how entire nations found ways to not only survive, but to thrive in the coldest of nights. Step with me back into that glowing cave of hide and wood. The fire still burns at the center, primal and steady, but look closer now at how the air itself is taught to dance. A teepee was not merely a bundle of hides stitched together. It was a living lung, a breathing organism shaped by hands that knew winter as intimately as they knew their own. Heartbeat. In the flicker of the flames, the walls did more than shelter. They guided currents, coaxed warmth to linger, and persuaded smoke to rise like a spirit into the night. The secret began with the liner, an inner wall of hide or canvas hung from the poles inside the main cover. Families often stretched this lining around half the interior in summer for shade, or around nearly the whole circle in winter. Between the outer wall and this liner ran a narrow gap, a second skin of air that functioned like insulation. The breath of the fire would warm this trapped layer, so that the cold outside had to fight through two barriers instead of one. If you have ever placed your hand near a stone warmed by sun and felt the gentle radiance, you can imagine what it was like to lean back against the inner lining. The chill softened, the surface breathing out a faint comfort. Above the fire, smoke needed a path. Too much smoke and a teepee became a suffocating cave, unlivable. Too open, and the heat bled away. The solution was elegant. At the very top, two triangular flaps of hide extended outward like small wings. These were the smoke flaps, tethered to long poles. By pushing or pulling these poles from inside, someone could angle the flaps with the wind. On calm days, they opened wide, a welcoming vent. On stormy nights, they narrowed, forming a hood that guided smoke upward, but discouraged snow and icy gusts from plunging in. It was a delicate dance between fire and wind, a choreography adjusted many times a day. One visitor in the 19th century described watching a woman handle the smoke flaps as though she were trimming sails on a ship. She stood inside the glowing circle, a long pole in her hand, shifting the hide wings against the invisible tide of air. The comparison is apt. The teepee was a vessel, and air was its ocean. Each adjustment steered comfort, directing warmth to stay and smoke to leave. To sit by the fire and watch the flaps shift above was to remember that even air can be commanded. That breath itself can be bent to human will. This quirk, the image of a family member as sailor of the sky, is one that's stuck in the memory of travelers. Children sometimes begged for the job, treating it like a game of steering clouds. Yet in truth, it was serious business.
I
A
can't
poorly
breathe.
adjusted smoke flap meant watery eyes, coughing throats, and headaches. A well-adjusted
What a
one meant a
beautiful
night where
evening.
laughter could rise above the crackling fire. Imagine, then, a child dozing with the gentle clatter of poles as someone shifted the flaps, the sound like the rigging of a ship, and the stars glimmering faintly through the gap as if watching the lesson. Scholars
efficiency
debate
here
just how
is truly
efficient this
remarkable.
ventilation system was. Some argue it achieved near-perfect circulation, allowing smoke to funnel upward while warm air swirled gently back down the inner walls. Others insist that on windy nights the draft could turn mischievous, blowing sparks and pulling heat straight out the top. The truth, again, lives somewhere between. Oral accounts from elders tell of both cozy nights and nights of coughing. But what matters more is not whether the teepee was flawless, but that it embodied a principle, knowledge of air, refined over generations, made survival not only possible, but sustainable. For anyone who has slept in a modern tent with a small vent, the difference is striking. A teepee was not a sealed bubble, but a conversation with the elements. It admitted that wind would always win in the end, but negotiated terms. Let the smoke go. Keep the warmth,
It is very
share
cold
the
tonight.
space. Even the fire itself seemed calmer
stars
when given this
guide
pact,
us through the...
its breath rising steadily without struggle. And around it, families leaned closer, their faces illuminated in gold, their bodies resting in the embrace of double walls. Think of those double walls again, the way they formed a hidden passage for air. In summer, cool breezes slip down this corridor, drawn in from beneath the lifted edges, then whisked away through the smoke hole. In winter, with edges sealed, that same corridor trapped warmth, turning the teepee into a cocoon. It was the same structure, yet it changed with the season. Another reminder that the teepee was alive, not static, like a creature with fur that grows thicker in cold and sheds in heat. The teepee adapted, breathing differently as the year turned. There is a tenderness to this design. It does not fight nature with brute force. It listens, watches, and then guides. To live in such a dwelling was to understand that survival was not about conquest, but
The plants give us
conversation.
their healing.
The primal fire at the center did not rage unchecked. It was moderated by walls that taught it patience, and as smoke drifted upward, families might look to the opening and glimpse the starry sky. Perhaps only a single star visible through shifting clouds, a reminder that the world was vast, but still connected to their small circle. Quirky details abound in accounts of winter nights. Some say children used the lining gap as a secret passage to slip around unseen, giggling as if the walls themselves had tunnels. Others recall that food or tools were tucked into that space, kept warm by the captured air. Imagine then a pouch of dried berries resting quietly between the hides, warmed not by fire alone, but by the invisible river of air flowing through the teepee's second skin. Such details bring the structure to life as more than wood and hide. It was a partner in daily existence. If there is debate, it is often about whether tipis could truly shield families from the most brutal cold, the kind that froze rivers solid and made the air sparkle with ice crystals. Some visitors doubted, describing frost still clinging to the inside walls at dawn. Others swore they had felt comfortable, even cozy, lulled to sleep by warmth. Perhaps both are true, depending on how well the flaps were angled, how thick the hides, how attentive the firekeeper. Survival, after all, is not perfection. It is resilience. And resilience has always included adaptation, compromise, and sometimes enduring a bit of discomfort with grace. So when you picture a teepee in winter, do not see only poles and hides. See lungs breathing, sails adjusting, warmth whispering along a hidden corridor. See a child tracing patterns in the frost that sometimes still gathered at the edges, while the smoke rose above like a spirit returning to the sky. See the family circle leaning together, their laughter softened by the insulation, their dreams carried upward with the sparks. This was the lesson of airflow, not written in textbooks but lived in bone and breath. A lesson that warmth is not only in fire, but in the way air moves, in the way walls are taught to sing with heat and silence, the bite of wind. And as the night deepened, footprints outside were buried by snow, erased within moments. Inside, the air continued its slow, circular dance, unseen but felt, cradling the sleepers in a portable cave of breath and flame. The fire in the teepee glows softly, but if we step outside that circle of warmth and look east, south, and north, we find that not every family in winter sheltered beneath buffalo hides. The plains were one story, yet across the continent, human ingenuity unfolded in many shapes. Each dwelling was its own version of a cave, some woven from bark, some built from timber and earth, some hardened against the desert sun. The primal fire still flickered at the center, but the walls that embraced it looked strikingly different, reminding us that survival in winter was not a single solution but a patchwork of many. Far to the northeast, beyond the endless grass, and into the forests of birch and maple, people shaped the wigwam. Unlike the tall, conical form of the tipi, the wigwam curved low and rounded. Like a half-buried shell, its frame came from bent saplings, young trees coaxed into arches and lashed together, then covered with sheets of birch bark or woven mats of cattail reeds. In winter, extra layers were added, thick bark overlapping like shingles on a roof. The result was a dome, sturdy against falling snow, its curved shape inviting drifts to slide harmlessly off the sides. Entering such a place felt less like stepping into a tall tent and more like ducking into the belly of a living tree, a wooded cave among the forest footprints. Inside, mats spread across the ground softened the frozen soil. At the center burned the fire, its smoke curling upward to a vent left open at the top. The air smelled of bark, sweet and resinous, and the walls glowed faintly when touched by flame. Families slept on raised platforms built from branches and reeds, sometimes layered with furs. To lie on such a platform was to rest above the damp ground, warmed from beneath by stored heat and from above by the glowing bark walls. One traveler remarked that the wigwam breathed like the forest itself, a house whose bones were saplings, whose skin was tree, whose spirit was fire. The quirky detail of wigwams lies in their versatility. In some Algonquin stories, children amuse themselves by slipping scraps of birch bark into the fire, watching them flare bright before vanishing like shooting stars. Others describe wigwams patched with whatever came to hand, bark, grass mats, even hides if the season demanded. One could almost imagine a patchwork quilt rising from the forest floor, stitched together not with thread, but with survival itself. Southwest, the story shifted again. In the mesas and valleys where winter came with cold nights but dry skies, the Navajo built the Hogan. A Hogan's frame was usually timber laid in a hexagonal or circular pattern, then packed over with earth. From a distance, it looked like a small hill rising out of the ground, a mound with a smoke hole at the top and a low doorway facing east toward the morning sun. Entering a Hogan in winter was like stepping into the earth's own womb. The walls were thick, the air still, and the fire at the center glowed against packed soil that seemed to drink in heat and breathe it. Back slowly, steadily, like a great sleeping animal. What fascinates many is how the Hogan worked both ways, warm in winter, cool in summer. The thick earth walls moderated extremes, sheltering those inside from the desert's icy nights and blistering days. Some Hogans had wooden planks layered beneath the earth, others relied on packed clay, and over time the structure hardened into a form that could last decades. Children grew up watching parents smear new layers of mud or clay along the walls, a yearly ritual of renewal that turned maintenance into ceremony. To sleep inside a Hogan was to sleep inside a breathing mound of earth, the primal fire glowing not against hide or bark, but against soil itself. There is a debate among scholars about which structure was best at holding heat: the tall tipi with its airflow, the rounded wigwam with its bark shingles, or the earthen Hogan with its heavy insulation. Some argue that the Hogan's mass gave it superior warmth retention, especially for long winter nights. Others suggest that the tipi's portability made it more efficient, as families could follow bison herds and avoid the deepest cold. Still others note that the wigwam's low dome captured warmth snugly, perfect for smaller family groups. The truth, as always, is that each was best in its own land, shaped by resources and climate. To measure them against one another is like asking whether a fish or a bird is more suited to survival. They each thrived where they belonged. The motif of the cave lingers across all these forms. The tipi was a moving cave of buffalo hide. The wigwam, a bark-lined hollow in the forest. The hogan, a mound of earth with fire at its heart. Each offered not only shelter, but a sense of entering a different world. When one ducked through its doorway, from outside winter howled. Inside, there was a glow, a circle of life, and a moment where the starry sky beyond was forgotten, traded for the soft constellations of sparks rising upward. Quirks also show up in small habits. In wigwams, families sometimes decorated the inside walls with woven mats, colored with dyes that caught firelight in surprising patterns. In hogans, the east-facing door was never mere convenience. It was a tradition, a way to greet the rising sun each morning, even in the coldest months, as a prayer woven into architecture. And in tipis, as we have already seen, dogs curled like small suns against the sleepers. Everywhere, houses became not only shelters, but storytellers, carrying memory in their design. One might wonder, did these houses ever fail? Were winters too fierce for bark, hide, or earth? Accounts differ. Some settlers described waking in borrowed wigwams, where frost crept along the walls, a reminder that no human dwelling banishes cold entirely. Others swore that hogans remained surprisingly temperate even in bitter weather, so warm that smoke seemed reluctant to leave. These contradictions are not errors, but testaments to the diversity of experience. A well-built wigwam, tended carefully, could be snug. A poorly maintained hogan might leak drafts. The difference often lay in skill, attention, and the bond between people and dwelling. When families drifted to sleep inside these varied shelters, the experience was more than physical. The primal fire remained the same, crackling softly.
Dreams,
the laughter
rhythm,
of children, the sighs of
across
elders,
Tipi,
the rhythm of dreams,
Wigwam,
all
Hogan.
echoed across Tipi, Wigwam, and Hogan alike. In every case, the house became a cocoon of safety in a world where death by cold was always close. To lie within those walls was to rest in trust. Trust in ancestors who had refined the design. Trust in neighbors who shared work. Trust in the fire that linked one generation's night to the next. So not everyone slept in a teepee, but everyone, in their own way, found a cave to call their own. Whether bark, earth, or hide, the circle repeated. Fire glowed at the center, walls curved around, and the starry sky waited just beyond the smoke hole. Outside, footprints disappeared into snowdrifts. Inside, the footprints of ancestors lingered, pressed into design itself, reminding each sleeper that survival was not only possible, but beautiful. Imagine now the teepee again, standing tall against the winter storm, its buffalo hide skin trembling gently under the push of the wind. Inside, the primal fire still breathed, steady and glowing. But the true shape of life here is not the cone of poles or the flap of hides. It is the circle drawn around the flames each night. Families did not scatter themselves haphazardly across the floor. They gathered in order, in arcs that mirrored the structure above, as if the teepee itself were teaching them geometry, a lesson in circles, balance, and shared warmth. At the center, the fire was more than utility. It was breath, heart, and altar. The Lakota and many other plains peoples regarded the hearth as sacred space. To place one's bedroll near it was not merely about heat, but about belonging to the circle of life itself. Each family member found a spot in the ring, heads often turned outward, feet angled toward the fire so that in sleep they resembled rays of a sun, the primal fire as the burning core. Children might nestle closer to their mothers, elders on the more protected side away from drafts, while hunters and younger men often took positions nearer to the entrance, ready to step out if duty called. The effect was practical. Each body shared warmth with the next, forming a chain of heat. But it was also symbolic, a daily reminder that survival was communal. No one slept entirely alone. Even in dreams, one belonged to the circle. And when you opened your eyes at night, perhaps stirred by a shift in the fire or a dog's sigh, you would see the dim silhouettes of your kin, their breath rising in unison toward the smoke hole, a constellation of lives beneath the same starry sky. Quirky details shine in these nightly arrangements. Some families placed small wooden headrests under their robes, carved simply, while others preferred grass-stuffed sacks. There were stories of children using a rolled-up dog as a pillow, both child and animal content in the shared warmth. Dogs were not an afterthought in this circle. They were participants. One traveler wrote of counting 3 dogs curled tightly against the family's youngest, their bodies like glowing embers themselves. This practice was so common that among certain groups the phrase two-dog night came to mean a bitter cold evening, while a 3-dog night was even harsher. It is a detail both amusing and profoundly human. The measure of winter not in degrees, but in the number of canine companions pulled close. Yet debates arise even in something as intimate as sleeping. Some accounts insist that the smoke hole allowed glimpses of stars, that children fell asleep watching Orion's belt or the North Star wink through shifting clouds. Others argue that with the constant smoke, visibility would have been minimal, that only on clear, windless nights would the heavens appear. The difference may seem small, but it reminds us of how memory and experience color the truth. Perhaps some winters were too choked with haze for stars, while others offered fleeting windows where the cosmos spilled in, like a blessing from above. Either way, the smoke hole was more than ventilation. It was a lens to eternity, whether clouded or clear. Sleeping arrangements also carried spiritual weight. The fire's position at the heart of the teepee was often described as the breathing hearth, a living presence that needed care. Someone always tended it, even through the long hours of night. Children took pride when old enough to add a stick of wood, learning that to feed the fire was to feed the family. Without it, warmth died. Meals could not be cooked.
The fire
Stories
pit holds our stories.
In many ways, fire was considered a relative, a being deserving respect. Falling asleep beside it was not unlike resting beside a guardian. The motif of the cave emerges strongly here. Just as ancient caves once cradled families against the Ice Age, the teepee in winter became a portable cavern. Its walls of hide muffled the storm, its ribs of pine echoed stone arches, and the hearth glowed as a miniature sun. The circle of sleepers mirrored the shape of footprints left in snow, close together, overlapping, pointing inward. When people drifted to sleep, they carried with them this sense of enclosure. The outside world erased, the inside world whole and breathing. There are quirks of ritual as well. Some families told stories before sleep, each tale circling the fire like the people themselves. Elders
they
might
traced the
recount
path
hunts,
of the star
migrations, or
remembering
legends
the
of the
ancient
stars seen
migrations
through the
etched
smoke
in the
hole.
sky.
Others sang soft songs, Lullabies meant not only for children, but for the fire itself, as if reminding it to keep glowing until dawn. A teepee at night was therefore not silent, but filled with whispers, breaths, and occasional laughter, sounds woven so softly that they merged with the crackle of wood and the sigh of wind. The debate that lingers in modern retellings concerns comfort. Was it truly warm in these circles, or simply less cold? Visitors unfamiliar with buffalo robes often compared them to heavy, cumbersome blankets, difficult to shift but undeniably insulating. Some swore that once wrapped, you could sleep deeply, even comfortably, while others noted that frost sometimes formed on the walls by morning, hinting at a constant battle between fire and cold. Both are true, of course. Comfort was relative, shaped by expectation. To those who grew within this tradition, the circle around the fire was home, and within its warmth, even imperfect warmth, dreams unfolded. Imagine it now. Outside, snow erases footprints almost as soon as they are made, the wind reshaping the land with every gust. Inside, the circle holds steady. Fire breathes, sleepers breathe, dogs sigh. A child stirs, sees the faint glow of embers, hears the low murmur of an elder adjusting the flaps above, and drifts back into slumber. In that moment, the teepee is no longer just shelter. It is a world entire, a cosmos small enough to fit into the palm of one's hand, yet vast enough to hold generations. If this quiet fire is keeping you company, ancient Fireside welcomes your like, and a simple listening from city time in the comments. So our circle can find you in the snow. To close your eyes, there was to know that life could continue, even when the night was long and the cold deep. The cave was portable, the fire eternal, the circle unbroken. And when dawn arrived, the sleepers would wake not scattered, but still joined, each footprint leading back to the same hearth. The circle around the fire glows with warmth, but a fire alone cannot keep a family through winter. Heat without food is like a cave without light. Shelter, yes, but no life. So as the blizzard sings outside the teepee walls, let us look at what sustains those who lie in that ring of buffalo robes. Not only the heat of the primal fire, but the strength of food prepared long before snow began to fall. In the plains, that food was pemmican, the strange, humble, and extraordinary invention that turned the buffalo into a feast that lasted months, even years. At its simplest, pemmican was a mixture of dried meat pounded into powder, melted fat, and sometimes dried berries. But to call it simple is like calling the teepee just a tent. Each step required skill, patience, and reverence. First came the drying of meat. Strips of buffalo flesh were cut thin, stretched on wooden racks, and left to the sun and wind. In summer, the air itself became the oven, pulling water away until the meat snapped when bent. Women and children often tended these racks, shooing away birds, adjusting the strips. Once dried, the meat was pounded between stones until it became powder, fibers broken down into dust that held the memory of muscle and hunt. Next came the fat, rendered slowly in pots or buffalo stomachs turned into vessels. The clear, golden grease poured like liquid sunlight, hot and shimmering. Into it went the meat powder, stirred until every speck was coated. Sometimes dried choke cherries or blueberries were added, staining the mixture purple and red, tangy jewels hidden in the mass. The result was pressed into rawhide bags, sealed, and stored. A sack of pemmican might weigh 90 pounds, a treasure chest of energy that could last a family through the frozen moons of winter. What makes pemmican remarkable is not only its efficiency, but its philosophy. The buffalo was not a creature to waste. Its hide became shelter, its sinew string, its bones tools, its stomach containers. Pemmican itself was the edible expression of this ethic. Every shred of meat, every drop of fat, preserved. Where other cultures might eat fresh and let the rest rot, here nothing rotted. The buffalo's life continued in hundreds of forms, from robes that warmed to food that nourished, from glue boiled from hooves to toys carved from bone. This was not frugality alone. It was reverence, an understanding that to waste was to dishonor the spirit of the animal. Quirky stories accompany Pemmican too. Children sometimes played with the pounding stones, pretending to grind meat even when the pestles were too heavy for their hands. Traders later marveled at how Pemmican, though unappealing in appearance, fueled journeys of hundreds of miles. One French explorer wrote that he had eaten it for weeks, and though weary of the taste, admitted he never lacked strength. There are even accounts of people sculpting small balls of pemmican and tossing them like toys, though no one dared waste a bite when hunger pressed. Imagine a child giggling, tossing a ball of meat and fat, only for an elder to catch it midair and scold, "That is tomorrow's life you're throwing." Yet debates surround pemmican. Some historians argue it was the single greatest survival food of North America, rich enough to sustain explorers, fur traders, and armies. Others suggest its reputation is exaggerated, that while high in calories, it lacked variety and could become monotonous or even difficult to digest if eaten exclusively. Some modern experiments claim pemmican can last for years if sealed properly. Others insist it spoils within months unless stored in cold. The truth lies in the practices of the people themselves. Pemmican endured because those who made it knew how to handle it, how to balance it with other foods, and how to weave it into a life that did not separate sustenance from ceremony. The motif of footprints appears even here. Each sack of pemmican was like a footprint into the future, a step laid down months ahead so that when winter came, the path was already prepared. To eat pemmican by the fire was to remember the hands that cut, dried, and pounded, the hunt that filled the sacks, the long summer days under the starry sky when the racks stood tall. Food became memory. Every bite carried the sun of summer into the darkness of winter. Imagine again the circle inside the teepee. A woman reaches into a rawhide bag, pulls out a chunk of pemmican, softens it near the fire. She mixes it into a pot with snow to make a rich, oily stew. The air fills with a scent halfway between roasted meat and wild berries. Children stir, their noses twitching, dogs lifting their heads. Soon, bowls are passed around, each person sipping warmth that is both food and history. In each taste, there is buffalo, berry, smoke, and sun. Quirks appear in preparation methods. Some families preferred their pemmican eaten raw, sliced like a bar of chocolate. Others always cooked it into soups, believing heat released its spirit. Some added marrow, scooped from split bones, for extra richness. Traders later developed pemmican contracts, Wink buying huge quantities from indigenous producers to fuel fur brigades. For decades, pemmican became currency, a commodity so valuable that wars and treaties were influenced by its control. It was more than food. It was power disguised as grease and powder. Debates also linger about health. Could a person live solely on pemmican? Some say yes. Stories tell of hunters surviving weeks on nothing else. Others caution that without fresh greens or variety, illness followed. Once again, the indigenous understanding proved deeper. Pemmican was never meant to stand alone. It was a foundation a reserve, a guarantee. Berries added not just taste but nutrients. Bone marrow added strength. And variety came from whatever else the season allowed. The wisdom was balance, not excess. Think of Pemmican as a bridge. It carried people across the void of winter, from one hunting season to the next, from storm to thaw. In this way, it was as sacred as the tipi itself. A tipi without Pemmican was like a fire without wood, warm for a moment, doomed to fade. But with Pemmican, the circle around the hearth could laugh, sing, and even play in the depths of January, knowing that hunger had been tamed, if only for a while. So the primal fire burned, the cave of hides embraced, and Pemmican fed the sleepers. Outside, the snow covered yesterday's footprints. Inside, the memory of the buffalo carried them forward. Under a sky of invisible stars, the family dreamed, their bellies full, their hearts steady. The storm might rage for days, but in the rawhide sack at the wall lay summer itself, waiting to be stirred into tomorrow's stew. The tipi and the Pemmican belonged to the sweeping plains, where buffalo thundered and horizons seemed endless. But if our footprints wander northeastward, through forests dense with pine and birch, the story of winter survival takes on new colors. Here, snow gathered not only in drifts across the open land, but in heavy blankets upon tree limbs, bending branches until they cracked in the night. The primal fire still glowed at the center of homes, but the food that sustained families was drawn not from herds of bison, but from gardens, rivers, and lakes locked in ice. And the key to it all lay in three companions known as the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash, plants that had long agreed to grow together as if bound by kinship. For centuries, the peoples of the Northeast cultivated these crops in concert. Corn grew tall and straight, offering a pole for beans to climb. Beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, feeding the corn. Squash sprawled across the ground, its wide leaves shading the earth, keeping moisture in, and discouraging weeds. Together they made not only a garden, but a small ecosystem, a living family of plants that mirrored the human families who tended them. When harvested and dried, they provided the holy trinity of nutrition, grain, protein, and vitamins. To eat the Three Sisters was to carry the sun of summer into the freezing moons of winter. Drying was essential. Corn was shucked and braided into long ropes, then hung from rafters where smoke from fires curled around it, adding both preservation and flavor. Beans were shelled, laid in baskets, and left to dry until they rattled like small stones. Squash was sliced into thin rings, strung on cords, and hung near the hearth, glowing orange in the firelight like halos of captured sunlight. The image of a winter wigwam or longhouse hung with these garlands is both practical and poetic. A cave adorned with the memory of gardens, the walls whispering promises of nourishment. Storage was another art. Families dug pits into the earth, lining them with birch bark or woven mats. Into these cool, dark cellars, they placed their dried harvest, sealing the top with bark and soil. Snow covered the mound, insulating it further. These caches were like time capsules, hidden footprints in the earth, waiting to be opened when the cold grew fiercest. Imagine a mother brushing snow away, lifting bark, and pulling from the earth a basket of beans that still rattled with the energy of summer. In that moment, the land itself seemed to hand back the memory of warmth. Fishing, too, was vital. In winter, rivers and lakes froze solid, but families cut holes in the ice, lowering lines or spears to catch fish that swam in the dark water below. Sometimes fires were built on the ice beside these holes, their light shimmering across the frozen surface, a starry sky reflected beneath the feet. The taste of fresh fish, grilled quickly over flames, or simmered in a pot with dried corn, was a gift in the monotony of dried food. Even in deep January, the lakes whispered life, their frozen shells no match for human persistence. Quirks of these food practices bring warmth to the story. Children sometimes gnawed on dried squash like candy, sweet and chewy. Corn braids hanging from rafters doubled as decorations, swaying gently whenever a door flap opened. Hunters returning from the forest often joked that the real strength of the people was not their boughs but their beans, the quiet power stored in baskets beneath the snow. And in some stories, the three sisters were spoken of as actual beings, spirits who lived together, quarreled sometimes, but always returned to each other's side. To cook corn, beans, and squash together was not only nutrition, but an act of respect, a reminder of this familial bond. Historians debate how well these food stores held up through especially harsh winters. Some accounts suggest that dried corn and squash could last until spring without issue. Others tell of spoilage when storage pits were poorly lined or too damp, leading to mold or rot. The truth again depends on care and attention. A well-dug cellar, lined with birch bark and checked regularly, could keep food edible for months. A careless one could betray its keepers. Survival was not only about knowledge, but vigilance, a constant partnership between human hands and the earth beneath them. The motif of the cave deepens here. A storage pit was quite literally a man-made cave, a hollow dug into the soil, filled with treasures of the harvest. To retrieve food from it in winter was like drawing firewood from a hidden cavern, except instead of flames, it yielded kernels and beans that could turn into stew. The primal fire at the hearth then transformed these humble stores into meals that warmed the body and lifted the spirit. In this way, food and flame were inseparable, the one sustained by the other, the circle of life maintained even when the world outside seemed determined to silence it. Picture now a family in a wigwam, snow piled high around the bark walls. Inside, the fire glows, sparks spiraling up toward the smoke vent. A pot hangs over the flames, filled with water melted from snow. Corn kernels tumbling within, beans swelling as they soften, squash slices adding color and sweetness. The smell fills the small dome, earthy and sweet, comforting as a blanket. Children watch the steam rise, their stomachs growling. When bowls are handed out, the stew glistens with a sheen of fat, simple yet profound. Each spoonful is more than food. It is memory. It is summer preserved. It is the promise of tomorrow. Quirky, too, was the way some communities measured the passing of winter by their stores. Families would joke about bean counting, one not as an accountant's task, but as a literal tally of how many baskets remained. Each emptied basket was both loss and triumph. Fewer supplies, yes, but proof that another week had been survived. In spring, when the last of the cornmeal or squash was eaten, the land was ready to awaken, and new seeds would be planted. The cycle closed, only to open again. The debate over whether agriculture or hunting was the superior strategy for winter survival often appears in history books. Some argue that reliance on crops made communities vulnerable to failed harvests. Others note that hunting was unpredictable, herds shifting with weather and chance. Yet the evidence shows that the blending of both was key. The three sisters gave security, while fish, game, and foraged nuts added variety. No single thread could weave the winter blanket. only many together could make it strong. So in the Northeast, winter nights were not only endured but enriched by the company of the three sisters. Their dried forms hung in the rafters, rattled in baskets, and simmered in pots, turning storms into suppers and cold into community. The primal fire burned, footprints crunched in snow outside, and above the smoke hole the starry sky flickered faintly, a reminder that even in darkness, sustenance waited. The land had taught its secrets and people had listened. A family could have shelter, a circle of warmth, and baskets of dried food. But without water, even the strongest hearth could not sustain life. On the Great Plains, in the Northeast forests, and in the frozen north, water became both friend and riddle during the long moons of winter. Snow fell in endless waves, rivers froze solid, and lakes wore thick armor of ice. It might seem that water was everywhere, but in truth, it was locked away, requiring fire, patience, and knowledge to coax it into drinkable form. The cave of the Tipi or the dome of the Wigwam might glow with the primal fire, but each bowl of soup, each sip of broth was a victory wrested from a frozen land. Melting snow was the most obvious answer, but it was never as simple as scooping a handful and eating it raw. Elders warned against such folly, saying snow would chill the stomach and weaken the body, stealing warmth instead of giving. Children sometimes tested this advice, sticking out their tongues or chewing a clump of fresh snow until their teeth ached. The lesson was quickly learned. The cold spread inward, and the body shivered. Instead, snow was brought in carefully, melted in pots near the fire. The liquid strained and sipped slowly. Fire transformed flakes into water. And in that transformation, one could see again the eternal partnership between flame and life. In many communities, ice from rivers or lakes was preferred. Hunters chopped blocks from frozen surfaces, hauling them back to camp. The ice, clearer and less airy than snow, yielded more water when melted, and some swore it tasted better. Imagine the sound, an axe striking, the crack of ice echoing across a silent valley. Then the grunt of men lifting heavy blocks onto sleds or into rawhide carriers. By nightfall, those blocks glittered near the firelight, like chunks of starry sky fallen to earth, waiting to be melted into tomorrow's stew. Quirky traditions surrounded these tasks. Some families believed that the first snow melted of the season should be offered to the fire itself, poured gently into the coals as a gift. Others told children to listen to the sound of ice cracking on a river in spring, saying it was the voice of water spirits returning. There were even playful sayings comparing a person's strength to how much snow they could melt in a day. Such customs softened the harshness of survival, turning necessity into story, duty into ritual. Debates arise when one considers just how much water people needed during these winters. Modern science suggests hydration is critical, yet oral histories sometimes speak of people drinking far less in cold months. Soups, stews, and even moist foods like fish or squash provided hidden hydration, so perhaps cups of clear water were less frequent. Some accounts claim that bodies adapted, requiring less direct drinking, while others argue that careful melting and rationing ensured steady intake. The truth, again, may lie in a balance. Less water than a modern person might expect, but never none, sustained by the clever use of food as liquid. The motif of the cave appears in the way water was stored. In some regions, pits were dug near streams, lined with bark, and filled with blocks of ice, covered over with snow to preserve them. These became secret wells beneath the earth, a kind of underground river frozen still yet waiting. To draw from such a store was like reaching into a hidden cavern, pulling out the possibility of life. In the dim firelight, A mother might chip off a fragment of ice, drop it into a simmering pot, and listen as it hissed and dissolved. One more breath added to the family's survival. Footprints also tell the story. Hunters and children alike left tracks, leading to waterholes on frozen lakes, paths trampled so often that they resembled snowy corridors. In the morning, those footprints would be filled with frost, glittering like silver. By evening, new ones would be pressed, evidence of the unbroken need for water. The land itself remembered these journeys, marking them in white upon white, until spring erased them once more. Consider the role of broth. Instead of drinking plain water, families often consumed liquid as soups made from pemmican, dried vegetables, or fish. This not only nourished, but hydrated, stretching limited supplies. A bowl of steaming stew offered warmth, calories, and fluid all at once. Children slurped greedily, their faces flushed with heat, while elders praised the wisdom of combining needs into one vessel. To eat was also to drink, and in winter, efficiency meant survival. One quirky practice recorded among northern groups was the use of snow packed into stomach, linings of animals, used as makeshift containers to carry back for melting. The idea may seem strange today, but it reflected a philosophy of using every resource available. Where modern eyes might see waste, winter survivalists saw opportunity. Such details remind us that necessity sharpens imagination, and that what seems peculiar is often profoundly practical. Yet debates linger still. Was snow safe to drink? Some argue it carried impurities, soot, or even sickness. Others insist it was pure, cleaner than most water in warmer months. Some experiments suggest that melted snow alone might lack minerals, leading to imbalance if consumed exclusively. But within the circle of the Tipi, these questions were answered by practice. Snow was melted, stews were eaten, and life continued. Tradition and experience weighed heavier than speculation. At night, when families curled in their sleeping circles, water simmered quietly in pots. The sound was soft, a bubbling heartbeat that joined the crackle of wood. Steam drifted upward, merging with smoke, carrying warmth to the roof vent. Children fell asleep to this sound, lulled by the knowledge that in the morning there would be broth to drink. Their lips warmed against the bite of frost. Outside, the starry sky glittered above frozen rivers. Inside, the cave of hide or bark or earth held its secret springs. Water in winter was never simply taken. It was earned. Every drop carried the memory of firewood gathered, ice chopped, snow melted, or food simmered. To drink was to honor both the land and the labor. The primal fire glowed, and in its light water returned, transformed from lifeless crystal into flowing life once more. And so the families endured, their footprints leading again and again to the frozen lakes, their songs rising with the steam, their survival a testament to knowing that even in a world of ice, water still waited to be found. Even in the depths of winter, life inside the teepee or wigwam was not a season of endless stillness. The storm might rage, the snow might erase footprints in minutes, but within the circle of firelight, there was always work to be done and joy to be found. A home in winter was a cave of responsibilities and laughter, filled with the rhythm of tasks that kept hands busy and spirits alive. Survival did not mean silence. It meant weaving labor and play together until the nights became bearable, even beautiful. Each morning began with the primal fire. Someone, often a parent or elder child, rose first, coaxing embers back to life. Sparks stirred, smoke curled, and soon the cave of hide or bark glowed once more. With the fire steady, the day unfolded into a pattern of tasks. Men sometimes left early to check traps or follow tracks across the snow, their footprints stretching away into the white. Women and children stayed behind, tending the space itself. Buffalo hides were beaten to keep them supple. Moccasins were mended, tools sharpened. The sound of scraping, tapping, and soft conversation filled the air like a winter symphony. Food preparation was constant. Meat was pounded for soups, dried vegetables measured carefully. Children might be asked to grind corn into meal, the rhythmic thud of pestle against mortar, a steady drumbeat beneath the crackle of fire. One quirky detail remembered in oral histories is that children sometimes tried to sneak tastes of a flower or dried berries, their sticky fingers giving them away. Laughter followed scolding, and in those moments the harshness of the season softened into warmth. Play was as essential as food. After chores, children invented games that used what little winter offered. Snow became both obstacle and playground. One game, the moccasin game, involved hiding a small object inside one of several moccasins laid in a row. Players guessed, teased, and laughed, with songs accompanying each round. Another was the snow snake, where polished wooden rods were slid across packed snow to see whose could travel farthest. Imagine the delight of children huddled against the cold, cheering as a snow snake skimmed across the icy surface like a darting fish beneath frozen waters. These games were not idle. They kept bodies active, minds sharp, and communities bonded. Debates among historians sometimes ask whether such games were mere pastimes or carried deeper cultural weight. Some argue that the moccasin game, with its songs and hidden object, trained memory and intuition. Others see the snow snake as more than play, a subtle form of practice for throwing spears or judging distance. Oral tradition suggests both are true. Games taught skills while also weaving joy into daily life. In winter, when nights stretched long and food could run short, laughter became a form of nourishment, keeping despair at bay. Inside the shelter, tasks and play blended. An elder might tell stories while hands worked, weaving myths of the starry sky while children stitched or played at their feet. Dogs, too, became part of the scene, chasing scraps of hide tossed to them or curling by the hearth as living cushions. The cave-like interior of the dwelling, walls glowing from firelight, resounded with voices, giggles, and the steady hum of survival. One quirky memory often shared is how children used the firelight itself as a toy. With hands stretched toward the flames, they cast shadows on the hide walls, creating shapes of animals or spirits. These shadow plays became a nightly entertainment, part storytelling, part silliness, part comfort. Imagine the laughter as a child made a buffalo with horns out of their fingers, the image dancing across the hide while outside the real animals trudged through drifts. In such moments, the teepee became not just a cave of survival, but a theater of imagination. Tasks also included mending tools. Arrowheads were sharpened, sinew strings replaced, snowshoes repaired. These activities carried deep significance. A broken bow left unattended could mean hunger. A cracked snowshoe could mean a dangerous stumble far from home. So the long nights were filled with the scraping of stone on stone, the careful winding of sinew. The smell of hide warmed near the fire. Children learned by watching, their small footprints in memory, leading them eventually to adulthood. Debates sometimes rise about whether winters were times of scarcity or abundance of time. Some records portray them as desperate seasons of near starvation, constant anxiety. Others speak of winter as the season of stories, when food was already stored, and the community finally had hours to sit, talk, and play. Likely both realities coexisted. Some winters pressed cruelly, others allowed space for laughter. Each year carried its own rhythm, depending on hunts, harvests, and luck. What endures in memory, however, is how people filled even harsh years with games and stories. Proof that culture persists even when the land seems unforgiving. Motifs wind through these tasks. The primal fire, always central, was the heart that kept the household alive. Every game was played in its glow, every tool repaired by its light. The cave-like dwelling cradled voices that might otherwise have been lost to the storm. Footprints outside showed the paths of hunters and children, but inside, the marks were less physical and more emotional, pressed into memory rather than snow. And above all, the starry sky remained beyond the smoke hole, silent and watchful. A reminder that even in laughter, the vastness of the universe was only a glance away. At night, after chores and games, families often gathered for stories. Elders told tales of tricksters, heroes, and animals that spoke. Some stories were meant to teach, others to amuse, still others to carry sacred knowledge. Children fell asleep listening, their dreams shaped by words that had been told for generations. In this way, winter was not just endured, but woven into the continuity of culture, each fire a link in a chain stretching back through centuries. If these winter tasks warmed your night, you can subscribe to Ancient Fireside to return here whenever you need a soft place to rest. And tell us where and when you're listening tonight. Picture this closing scene. The fire crackles, throwing sparks like tiny stars. Tools rest mended, baskets of food tucked safely away. Children lie curled in robes, their laughter fading into sleep. The dogs sigh, shifting closer to warmth. Outside, the storm erases footprints once more, the world beyond the cave blank and merciless. Yet inside, the circle glows with life, tasks complete, games played, stories told. The primal fire breathes on, and the community breathes with it, a rhythm that carries them through the longest night. Winter could press hard against the walls of a teepee, groaning like some ancient beast. The cold bit into the bones, and long nights often weighed heavily on body and spirit alike. Yet within this season of ice and storm, the people of the plains carried a secret fire, one that glowed not only in their teepees, but in small, rounded lodges set apart from the camp. These were the sweat lodges, Inipi in Lakota tradition, places of steam, song, and transformation. To step into one was to step into a living cave, to enter darkness lit only by the primal fire contained in glowing stones. The structure was humble at first glance. Saplings were bent into arches, lashed together into a low dome hardly taller than a man's shoulders. Over this frame, hides or blankets were stretched, sealing the space into shadow. At the center sat a shallow pit, awaiting stones heated in an outside fire. From the distance, it resembled a small mound of earth, unremarkable against the snowy plain. But for those who entered, it became a womb of renewal, a chamber where the body sweated. The spirit sang, and the cold world was kept at bay. The ceremony began with stones, called the grandfathers. Outside the lodge, a fire was built, primal flames licking high into the night, sparks flying toward the starry sky. Into the fire went rocks, chosen carefully for their strength, heated until they glowed red. Participants waited in silence, listening to the crackle of wood, watching the stones gather light. When ready, the rocks were carried inside on pitchforks or antler prongs, glowing like small suns. Set gently into the pit, they hissed as water was sprinkled, filling the lodge with steam that curled around bodies thick as breath. Inside, the darkness was total. broken only by the red glow of the stones. Men and women sat in a circle, backs against the frame, feet toward the pit, echoing the circle of sleepers in a teepee. The leader prayed, sang, or spoke, each word mingling with the rising steam. Soon sweat poured, dripping from faces and arms, pooling on the earth floor. The cold outside seemed like another world entirely. In that hot darkness, the body trembled, but not from frost. It trembled from release, from the purging of aches and sorrows. The quirky detail that surprises many is how children sometimes join these lodges. Not only adults, though the full ceremonies were often reserved for grown men or women. Shortened versions allowed young people to taste the heat, to learn the discipline of endurance. Laughter could mingle with prayer when a child squealed at the sudden rush of steam, only to be hushed by an elder's hand. For the community, the lodge was never only about the individual. It was about binding everyone together in shared trial, shared sweat, shared rebirth. Scholars debate the practical and the spiritual layers of the sweat lodge. Was it a health practice? A way to cleanse the body through heat, much like a sauna? Or was it primarily spiritual, a ritual of purification, prayer, and connection with ancestors? Many indigenous voices insist it was both, inseparable. The body and the spirit are not two separate caves, they say, but one chamber. To cleanse one is to cleanse the other. Some historians point to the antibacterial effects of steam, the loosening of muscles, the way sweat helps fight sickness. Others emphasize the songs, the prayers, the visions seen in the glowing stones. The truth is that for those who entered, the lodge was never divided. It was one living experience. The motif of the cave resonates strongly here. Entering the sweat lodge meant crawling through a low doorway, ducking into darkness, returning to a space that felt like the belly of the earth. Within, the red stones shone like a primal fire beating in the heart of the world. Steam rose like breath from the soil itself. To sit there was to be swallowed by the cave, to be held by it, and then to emerge reborn, as though stepping into new footprints on the snow. Quirky practices surrounded the use of these lodges. Some communities sprinkled herbs or cedar on the stones, filling the air with fragrance. Others used rattles or drums inside, their rhythms echoing the heartbeat of the earth. One traveler noted with awe how steam would roll from the lodge when the flap opened, billowing into the cold night like a spirit escaping. Children sometimes chased the baby, laughing as if they might catch it and hold it in their hands. The mix of solemnity and play, discipline and joy marked the ceremony as deeply human. Debates continue over the origins of the sweat lodge. Some suggest its form and ritual date back thousands of years, a practice shared across many cultures worldwide. Others argue that each community's version is distinct, carrying meanings not interchangeable with others. The Lakota Inuit, the Ojibwe purification lodges, the Navajo sweat ceremonies, each held its own songs, its own prayers, its own stories of origin. To flatten them into a single definition is to miss the richness of their differences. What unites them is the belief that heat and darkness, steam and stone can heal. Emerging from the lodge was often the most powerful moment. The door flap lifted, the cold air rushed in, and participants crawled out one by one, steam rising from their skin. The snow crunched underfoot, shocking after the suffocating heat. Breath became visible again, joining the starry sky above. Some lay down in snowbanks, rolling, laughing, gasping, their bodies jolted awake. Others stood quietly, gazing upward, hearts pounding, sweat cooling to ice on their brows. It was a rebirth not only of body, but of perspective. The world looked sharper, fresher, each star brighter than before. The primal fire outside still crackled, guarding the stones yet to be carried in. In the glow of its light, participants felt not weakened, but renewed, as if their burdens had melted away with the sweat. Children stared at the steam lifting from their parents' shoulders, as though watching spirits fly. And in that moment, the harshness of winter seemed less cruel, less endless. The storm might still howl, but inside the human heart a new warmth had been lit. The sweat lodge then was more than survival. It was affirmation. It said, we are not only bodies to be warmed, not only mouths to be fed, we are spirits. Footprints pressed into the snow of time, voices rising to the starry sky. In the midst of winter winds, people entered a small, humble cave of saplings and hides, and found within it a universe of fire, stone, steam, and song. When the storm shrieked across the plains, and the night pressed like iron against the walls of the tipi, survival meant more than a good fire or a stock of food. It meant wrapping the body itself in layers of wisdom. Clothes were not mere coverings, they were second shelters, small portable caves stitched and woven, warmed by fur, feather, and faith. Each robe, each blanket, each stitch of sinew was another step between fragile flesh and the icy hand of winter. The buffalo robe was perhaps the most iconic of these garments, heavy, broad, and lined with the soft underfur of the bison. It became both mattress and blanket. Cloak and tent wall, families lay beneath them at night, fur side down for warmth, hide side up to block drafts. In the morning, robes doubled as cloaks for hunters or coverings for travelers. The primal fire painted their surfaces with gold, making the skins seem alive again, glowing as if the spirit of the buffalo still breathed within. A single robe could weigh as much as a child, but its heft was a comfort, pinning the sleeper in place against the restless wind. Beyond robes, clothing was carefully layered. Leggings of tanned hide, shirts of deerskin, moccasins lined with fur or stuffed with dried grass. All formed an armor against the cold. Quirky details emerge here. Some moccasins were lined with rabbit fur, soft and quick to replace, while others stuffed with dry moss, acting as natural insulation. Children sometimes laughed as they wiggled their toes in moss slippers, tickled even as the storm outside roared. These little tricks made the difference between numb feet and the chance to run, play, or hunt another day. Blankets, too, carried stories. Among the Navajo, weaving became an art that turned necessity into beauty. Wool from sheep, dyed with plants and minerals, was woven into patterns that carried meaning. Zigzags of lightning, diamonds of stars, bands of red earth. Wrapped around shoulders, such blankets offered warmth, but also identity. To wear one was to carry the land itself as a garment, to walk clothed in desert and sky. Traders would later marvel at their craftsmanship, paying high prices. But for the people who wove them, the blankets were more than commerce. They were prayers made tangible, warmth spun from both wool and spirit. Debates sometimes swirl about just how effective these garments were compared to modern fabrics. Could a buffalo robe truly keep a person warm at 40 below zero? Some argue yes, pointing to explorers who adopted them and survived storms that might otherwise have killed. Others suggest the robes were heavy, cumbersome, and prone to dampness. Yet in the circle around the fire, practicality won out. The robes worked because they were available, renewable, and integrated into a whole system of survival. To judge them by modern standards misses the point. They were part of a balance between fire, food, shelter, and movement. The motif of the cave returns in the way clothing was layered. Each piece formed a wall, a layer of stone against the elements. To wrap oneself in hide was to crawl into a portable cave, to carry safety upon the shoulders. Hunters venturing far from camp became walking shelters, their footprints trailing across snow. Their bodies warmed not only by effort, but by the wisdom stitched into every seam. One of the more curious practices recorded in oral histories was the use of mixtures of fat and ochre or red earth smeared onto skin. This layer acted as protection against windburn, keeping the face from cracking in the dry, cold air. Children were sometimes smeared from nose to chin, their cheeks glowing red not just from the cold, but from the clay. Outsiders might have thought it strange, but for those who lived it, it was as natural as tying a belt or donning a hood. Some even spoke of the ochre as spiritual armor, carrying the power of the earth itself against the bite of winter. Quirks extended to decoration. Even in the bleakest months, garments carried fringes, beads, or painted designs. A shirt might have quills dyed in bright colors, a robe painted with scenes of hunts, a moccasin stitched with patterns of stars. These embellishments served no thermal purpose, yet they carried warmth of another kind, the warmth of pride, beauty, and belonging. To wrap oneself in such clothing was to be reminded that life was more than endurance. Even in the coldest night, art found a way to glow. Debates arise here too. Some anthropologists argue that such decoration was impractical, wasted time and effort that could have gone to pure survival. Others counter that without beauty, survival is incomplete. Stories, patterns, and colors nourish the spirit as much as food nourishes the body. The very persistence of decorated clothing across cultures and centuries suggests the second view holds true. A person warmed by both robe and design is doubly strong, armored in body and heart alike. The primal fire played its role even in clothing. Robes and garments were often smoked, hung above flames until they absorbed the scent and protection of fire. Smoke helped waterproof hides, deter insects, and soften stiff leather. A robe that had never known smoke was unfinished, brittle. One could say that just as the fire breathed life into the teepee walls, it also breathed resilience into the garments that walked beyond them. Imagine the scene. A row of robes hung above a hearth, smoke curling around them like a blessing, sparks rising to meet the starry sky. Clothing also carried memory. A child's first moccasins might be kept, tiny footprints stitched into hide, a reminder of growth and belonging. A hunter's robe painted with scenes of his victories became both blanket and biography. Each stitch held a story, and in winter those stories wrapped around the body like companions. To sleep beneath such a robe was to dream not only of warmth, but of one's place in the long chain of ancestors. At night, when the family curled in their circle, robes spread over them. Moccasins drying by the fire, blankets tucked close, the world outside receded. The storm might scrape its claws against the Tipi, but inside the cave of hide and fabric, warmth prevailed. Dogs pressed close, children burrowed deep, elders sighed with relief. Every robe was another wall, every blanket another hearth, every decorated fringe another spark of humanity in the darkness. So winter clothing was not only armor against the cold, it was expression, memory, faith, and art. It was the cave one could wear, the fire one could drape across shoulders, the footprint left behind in snow that told the story of survival. And above it all, the starry sky watched, indifferent yet eternal. While within the circle of warmth, people laughed, sang, and slept. their bodies wrapped in wisdom spun from hide, wool, and earth. The tipi or wigwam in winter was more than a cave of warmth. It was also a kind of apothecary, a living chest of remedies gathered across seasons, remembered through generations. For when the snow fell and sickness crept in, when the cold numbed fingers and frost gnawed at skin, survival demanded more than robes and food. It required medicines, some practical, some spiritual, some resting in that space between fact and faith. Around the primal fire, families tended not only hunger but health, leaning on the quiet pharmacy of plants, stones, and animal gifts. One of the most trusted healers was the willow. Strips of bark, scraped and steeped in hot water, produced a bitter tea. Within that bitterness lay salicin, a natural compound that eased pain and lowered fevers. Long before laboratories extracted aspirin, people on the plains and in the forests sipped willow tea by firelight, grimacing at the taste, but sighing at the relief. Picture an elder handing a steaming cup to a coughing child, the steam rising to mingle with smoke, the taste sharp on the tongue, the warmth spreading through the body. The medicine might not cure every illness, but it soothed enough to let sleep come. And sometimes that was healing in itself. Quirky practices surrounded this bitter drink. Children were sometimes tricked with honey or berries added to the brew, though most knew the taste too well to be fooled. Some stories tell of grandmothers telling jokes as they stirred, making children laugh between sips so that the bitterness passed more quickly. In these small acts, medicine became more than chemistry. It became care, love folded into ritual. Stones, too, were part of the medicine chest, heated in the fire, wrapped in cloth or hide. They were placed against sore muscles, stiff joints, or cold feet. The warmth seeped deep, easing pain, lulling bodies toward rest. Hunters returning frostbitten from the plains placed stones at their sides, letting the heat draw life back into numb limbs. One quirky image often told is of children tucking small, warm stones into their robes before bed. Like primitive hot water bottles, they fell asleep with these companions pressed against their stomachs, comforted by the illusion of carrying a piece of the fire with them into dreams. Debates arise about treatments for frostbite. Some oral accounts speak of rubbing snow on frozen skin, a practice outsiders often described with horror. Was this a mistake or a method? Some argue it helped restore sensation gradually. Others that it risked deeper damage. Still others insist the snow rubbing was more symbolic, a way of acknowledging the wound with what had caused it. The truth is tangled, as survival often is. What is certain is that once back inside the cave of the dwelling, frostbitten skin was anointed with warm animal fat, massaged to restore circulation and protect it against further cold. Whether the snow rub was cure or cautionary tale, the care that followed was rooted in patience and observation. The motif of footprints weaves even into healing. Just as hunters left tracks across the snow in search of food, healers left footprints in memory, passing down which bark eased coughs, which roots soothed stomachs, which teas brought sleep. To follow in those tracks was to inherit wisdom. Each remedy was a step along a path carved not by books, but by trial, error, and care, laid down beneath the starry sky over countless winters. Other plants found their place in this chest. Cedar, burned in small bundles, filled lodges with fragrance that was both medicine and prayer. Sage cleansed air and spirit alike, its smoke drifting through tipis and longhouses during illness. Some teas were brewed from mint or yarrow, offering relief for stomachs or fevers. To outsiders, these were curiosities. To those who lived within the rhythm of the land, they were lifelines. A child with a fever was not handed pills, but a cup of steaming tea. Its heat a promise, its scent a comfort, its lineage stretching back farther than memory. Quirks abound in the telling. One story recalls a healer who insisted that a sick child sleep with a dog pressed to their chest, believing the warmth of the animal's breath could draw sickness away. Another describes families laying heated stones at the edges of a sleeping circle, creating an invisible wall of warmth that turned the tipi into a gentle oven. Whether these methods were wholly effective or partly symbolic, they spoke of creativity, of refusing to surrender to cold and illness. Debates also circle around how effective these medicines truly were. Modern science validates willow-bark, mint, and yarrow, confirming their compounds. But what of cedar smoke or dog breath cures? Some dismiss them as superstition. Others argue that even belief can heal. The placebo effect, though unspoken in those terms, was understood in practice. Faith in a remedy often carried its own power. Within the glow of the fire, when a mother whispered that the tea would ease the pain, perhaps the words themselves were part of the cure. The cave motif is powerful here too. To be ill in winter was to be trapped, body and spirit enclosed. But the dwelling itself became the cave of recovery. Fire glowed at its heart, medicines brewed at its edge, voices murmured comfort. Emerging from sickness was like stepping out of that cave into light, leaving behind shadows of pain. For each child who woke healed, each elder who sighed in relief, the medicine chest was vindicated, not by theory, but by survival. At night the fire crackled, pots steamed, and the circle of sleepers tucked close. Somewhere a cup of willow tea cooled by the hearth. Somewhere else, a stone still warm from the fire glowed faintly in the dark. Pressed against aching muscles, the starry sky hung above the storm, indifferent yet eternal. While inside, families fought illness with bark, fat, stones, and faith. The footprints of knowledge stretched backward through generations and forward into the future, carrying with them the wisdom that even in the harshest winters, healing was possible. If the songs and remedies eased your breath, leave a gentle note, place an hour, so ancient Fireside can greet you again when the embers glow. So the winter medicine chest was never just plants or stones. It was memory, experiment, love, and trust. It was the belief that the land, harsh as it seemed, always offered a cure if one looked closely enough. Around the primal fire in the cave of hide and wood, sickness met its match not in laboratories, but in the quiet, persistent hands of those who refused to let their families be claimed by the cold. The tipi on the plains, the wigwam in the forests, the Hogan in the desert valleys. Each has shown us how families carved out warmth against the cold. But the story of winter shelter stretches further still, across the breadth of a continent, a map etched not in ink but in snow, fire, and memory. If you follow the footprints northward, they lead to the lands of the Inuit, where the very ice itself became home. If you follow them west, the Navajo sing their trails through winter landscapes. And in the northwestern plains, the Blackfoot read the signals of storms in the snow. Every region answered the same question: how to endure the season of hunger and frost, with its own kind of cave, its own partnership with the primal fire, its own way of reading the starry sky. In the Arctic, where trees were scarce and storms endless, the igloo rose as a miracle of geometry and endurance. Blocks of snow were cut with knives of bone or ivory, stacked in a spiral that curved inward until it formed a dome. Each block leaned on the next, a balance so precise that the whole structure held firm against blizzards. Inside, the air was still, muffled, warmer than the outside by many degrees. The igloo was not fragile, but strong, a cave carved from the very material of winter itself. The primal fire here was no open flame, but the steady glow of the kulik, a lamp fueled by seal oil. Its flame flickered low and steady, sending out both heat and light. A small sun set upon a platform of stone. Around it, families sat, ate, mended, and slept, their voices softened by the snow walls that enclosed them. Quirky details of igloos still fascinate. Some families build small windows by inserting thin sheets of ice, allowing pale light to enter during the day. Others strung cords from igloo to igloo, guiding hands through whiteout storms, so no one lost their way. Imagine stepping outside into a world erased by snow. No horizon, no landmarks, only a rope leading from one rounded dome to another. Even in blindness, the community stayed connected. Elders also tell of reading the weather in the bones and entrails of animals, a kind of sky reading brought down to earth. A seal's liver might warn of storms. The cracks in a bone hint at changes in wind. Whether science or symbol, these practices stitched survival to observation, turning the land itself into a teacher. Yet debates surround the igloo too. Some travelers insisted it was surprisingly warm, even cozy, claiming they slept without shivering. Others described condensation dripping from the ceiling, dampening robes, reminding them that comfort was relative. The truth lies in balance again. With care, an igloo offered remarkable shelter. Without skill, it could feel like a trap of ice. Either way, it remains one of humanity's most ingenious responses to winter. A literal cave of snow beneath the starry sky. Turn now to the Navajo lands, where winter nights could be clear and cold, the desert air biting after the sun fell. Here, survival was guided not only by dwellings like hogans, but by song. The Navajo carried maps in their voices, paths remembered in melody. These song trails were not drawn on bark or carved in stone, but sung into memory. Each landmark, each rise or canyon, had a verse. To walk the land in winter was to hum the map, each note a footprint placed upon the earth. Even in storms, the songs guided travelers, tying them to the landscape as surely as cords tied igloos together. Quirky moments are remembered. Children learning to sing trails as games, their voices weaving directions like playful riddles. Adults corrected them gently, ensuring accuracy, for inaccuracy could mean danger. Yet the play itself ensured memory, embedding geography into the heart. Imagine a family walking through frosty canyons at dawn, breath rising like steam, voices low and steady, each note carrying them forward. The primal fire at home burned quietly in the Hogan, but here the fire was in their throats, warming the path with music. Debates surface when outsiders try to measure such traditions. Some question whether songs alone could guide in harsh conditions, arguing that landmarks vanish in storms. Others counter that the very act of singing reinforced memories so
itself
deeply
reinforces
that the land was
memory.
never truly lost. Modern maps may show distances and directions, but for the Navajo, song carried not only geography but spirit. To follow a trail in silence was to walk half blind. To sing was to walk in full vision. Farther north again, the Blackfoot people read the snow itself for messages. They spoke of snow signals, patterns and drifts, the angle of flakes, the texture beneath one's feet. A certain crunch might foretell warmer days, a certain softness the approach of storms. These signals were footprints of the weather, signs left by the sky upon the ground. Hunters relied on them, choosing when to pursue bison, when to wait. families trusted them, knowing when to conserve firewood, when to prepare for long confinement. To walk upon snow was not only to leave tracks, but to read them, to listen to the silent language of winter. Quirks abound here too. Some stories recall elders predicting storms by the way snow stuck to their eyelashes, or how children tested flakes on their tongues, claiming they could taste the weather. Playful, yes, but behind the play lay knowledge. Observation honed into instinct passed into culture. Snow was not only an enemy, but a messenger, and those who read its language walked with greater safety beneath the cold heavens. Debates about such practices reflect the tension between science and story. Can snow truly reveal the future of storms? Meteorologists might doubt, but oral tradition insists that patterns in nature are legible to those who pay attention. Perhaps the predictions were not always exact, but in survival, even partial foresight was invaluable. A warning, however imprecise, could save lives. And so, the reading of snow remained part science, part faith, part dialogue with the land. Across these regions, the igloos of the Inuit, the song trails of the Navajo, the snow signals of the Blackfoot, we see the continent as a great winter map, filled with caves of snow, footprints of song, fires of oil lamps, and skies bright with stars. Each community, distinct yet united by the need to endure, inscribed its own answers onto the land. Together they remind us that survival was not just about the body, but about imagination. Carving a home from ice, singing a path across desert, tasting the weather in a flake of snow. Picture it, a world of domes glittering beneath the aurora, of voices humming directions through canyon shadows, of footprints pressed into drifts that whisper warnings. The primal fire burns in many forms: buffalo robe hearth, seal oil lamp, desert blaze. But always it breathes, always it carries life. And above all, the starry sky spans the continent. One endless roof beneath which every community dreamed, endured, and left its mark. The winter has carried us far, through tipis glowing like walking caves, wigwams lined with bark, hogans packed with earth, igloos glittering like frozen shells beneath the aurora. We have sat by the primal fire, eaten from baskets of corn and bags of pemmican, sung trails across the desert, and read the language of snow. Now, as our story reaches its end, so too does the season of storms. Slowly, almost shyly, spring begins to stir. The air still bites, the nights are long, but in the whispers of wind and the slant of light, there comes a promise that the world will soon awaken. Families curled in their circles begin to dream forward, their minds preparing for the thaw. One of the first signs of change is the way days lengthen. Shadows shift, birds call faintly, rivers murmur beneath ice. Elders watch carefully, noting how many heavy snows have fallen. Among the Ojibwe, children were sometimes taught to count snowfalls, marking each one on sticks notched with small cuts. These memory sticks became records, a calendar carved into wood, whispering when it might be safe to travel, when the world would soften. Imagine a child tracing these notches by firelight, each cut a footprint of time, each mark carrying the hope of spring. Mock hunts were another way to prepare. Young boys and girls were led outside to practice tracking in snow, following faint prints of rabbits or deer, even when the animals themselves stayed hidden. Elders turned these lessons into games, asking children to guess which way the tracks led, or to spot how the snow was pressed deeper in one place than another. Laughter mixed with learning, so that when real hunts began again, The skills already lived in small hands and keen eyes. It was training, yes, but also play. A reminder that survival itself could be practiced with joy. Quirky traditions colored this season of waiting. Among some plains groups, children played with small dolls dressed for spring, acting out journeys of migration even while storms still raged outside. Others told riddles about animals returning, puzzles that folded education into entertainment. One story tells of a child who left tiny offerings of berries at the edge of melting snow, whispering to the land, "Wake soon." To adults, these gestures were sweet and playful. To children, they were rituals, ways of nudging the earth awake. Debates exist about how carefully communities could predict spring. Some accounts speak of counting the exact number of snows, 13, perhaps 14, before expecting warmth. Others suggest the timing was more fluid, guided by animal signs. The first bird calls, the movement of herds, the shifting of ice. In truth, no calendar was perfect. Winters stretched longer some years, shorter in others. What mattered was the readiness to move when the signs aligned, neither too early nor too late. The footprints of entire nations depended on this balance. The motif of the cave carries us here too. Winter dwellings, whether tipi, wigwam, or igloo, were caves that sheltered life through the darkness. But as spring approached, families began to imagine leaving those caves, stepping out into open light. Fires that once burned to guard survival now became beacons to prepare tools, patch canoes, and ready packs. The primal fire did not fade. It shifted purpose, from a guardian of endurance to a spark of renewal. Footprints also return as symbols. In deep winter, snow erased them quickly, swallowing paths in minutes. But in spring, footprints began to last longer, pressed into slush, drying into earth. To step outside and see your own track survive until evening was a quiet miracle, a sign that the land itself was loosening its grip. Children ran circles in the mud, stamping joy into the ground, delighted to leave marks that lasted. In their laughter, the promise of survival became certainty. Dreams took on new meaning in this season. Winter dreams had been heavy, often filled with the hush of snow and the glow of hearths. As spring neared, dreams turned outward. Young men and women sometimes sought vision quests, leaving the circle to spend a night alone, fasting and waiting for guidance. The cold still clung, but in the silence of early spring, they listened for spirits in wind and stars. To return with a dream was to bring back not just courage, but direction, guiding the community into the year ahead. Quirky and tender customs marked the transition. Some families held giveaways, offering small gifts, beads, hides, or food to neighbors, symbolizing renewal and gratitude. Others held talking circles, sitting together to share what winter had taught them. Stories carried on voices that blended with bird song, just beginning to return. These acts were not only ceremonies, they were bridges, stepping stones across the icy river into the warmth of another season. Debates touch even here. Were these rituals purely practical, meant to strengthen community bonds before migration, or were they spiritual acts rooted in cosmology? To separate the two is to misunderstand. For those who lived them, there was no dividing line. To share gifts was both survival strategy and sacred duty. To dream beneath the starry sky was both personal vision and community map. Spring was not only a season of nature, but of spirit, arriving in both land and heart. Picture the closing scene. The teepee walls still tremble with the last cold winds, but inside the fire glows low and steady. Children sleep curled in rows, dogs stretched beside them. Elders whisper softly of plans. where to move, what ceremonies to prepare, which seeds to plant. Outside, the snow melts in rivulets, revealing the dark earth below. Footprints pressed into mud instead of vanishing into white. Above, the starry sky shines clearer now, no longer muffled by storms. Its constellations marking paths of both season and spirit. The primal fire fades to embers. The cave of hide, bark, or snow has done its duty, carrying life through the long night of winter. Soon, families will rise, gather their belongings, and step into the new year. But for now, in the hush before dawn, they rest in circles of warmth and trust, hearts steady, dreams alive. The footprints of ancestors stretch behind them. The footprints of children stretch ahead, and the stars, eternal above, watch with silence, bearing witness. So our journey closes where theirs did each winter, with gratitude, with endurance, with quiet hope. The storm has passed, the night has softened. The cave breathes one last time. And as the embers dim, I leave you with a gentle wish. May your own fire glow steady. May your dreams walk beneath the starry sky. And may sleep carry you warmly into morning. If you wish to come back to this hearth, a quiet like and subscribe to Ancient Fireside is enough. Your footprints will find us again. Good night.